So it's no secret that dating apps have become an integral part, if not an essential part, in dating, especially amongst young people. With dating apps becoming so popular and inescapable, you also may be well aware of the fact that many of its users are very dissatisfied with their experience. Dating apps were fun at first. It was a fun, new, convenient way to meet hot new singles in your area, but now they just have become a anxiety-ridden hellscape that people just can't stand. As the algorithms have become more aggressive, making it extremely clear to its users that there is a major gatekeeping problem with these dating apps, people have lost hope and lost faith in what these apps can really do for them in their love life. And even saying the words love life in association with dating apps gives me pause, because it seems like that is the last place you will find your soulmate, which sounds counterintuitive, but since the rise of dating apps and the sexual revolution, hookup culture has reached an all-time high, but is sinking back down to an all-time low with the rise of celibacy. Women specifically, it seems like, are quite fed up with the BS and are turning away from the Tumblr era sex positivity and moving toward a more conservative relationship with their bodies and who they choose to share it with. The girls are going boy sober, or celibate, these days, and dating apps are not happy about it, specifically Bumble, which is the inspiration for this video. Bumble, an app made for women who want to message first, is going through a massive rebrand where they're essentially taking away their defining characteristic, and now men can message first. And with this rebrand, of course, they have this big ad campaign, and it didn't go over very well. Specifically, their billboards about celibacy. One of their billboards read, "A vow of celibacy is not the answer." And there was one about, like, don't get rid of dating or don't opt out of dating and become a nun. And based off of these billboards, it's very clear that Bumble is flailing, desperately trying to get a grasp back on their female user base. Because, if you didn't know, dating apps and their success are completely driven by their female demographic, especially Bumble, because, again, you have to message first if you're a woman on there. And at first, that was, like, cool. I think Bumble at first succeeded because it was like the pseudo-feminist dating app where, if you're a woman, you can message first. And that seemed appealing because, creepy men can't, well, as far as you know, based off of their profile, creepy men who you don't want to speak to can't message you weird things. And at first that seemed fun, but after using it for a while, realized I actually have no interest in messaging first. And I think a lot of women also felt that way because, and I live in New York City, so I feel like this is even more so exasperated. A lot of women are like borderline traumatized by their experiences on these dating apps. And it's like, why would I facilitate my potential, strong word here, but abuse? Like, why would I facilitate my potential negative experience with a man? I feel like I'm not articulating it as best as I could, but I feel like a lot of women can relate to what I'm saying because there are so many risks involved with dating online. And of course, yeah, like if this was 20 years ago, the idea of meeting a man online sounds insane. Then we got used to it and it was normalized. And now we're like, wait, it is kind of weird and kind of scary. And, obviously being like essayed from a guy you meet on a dating app is like one of the worst case scenarios, but there's so many ways that like meeting someone off a dating app can go wrong. And one of the biggest issues that people have is the way that hookup culture has been perpetuated and has reached this insane peak with the help of dating apps that people are like, enough is enough. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. I actually do want a relationship and I don't want to just settle with hookups. It seems so hard to find someone these days, especially with dating apps. I mean, I met my boyfriend on a dating app, and every time I tell people that, they're like, wow, you're like the last couple in New York City who has found love on a dating app. And as I was contemplating the concept of decentering men, it dawned on me that although women are opting out of dating and decentering men, it seems like the harder that dating has become, the more of a hot commodity having a boyfriend is. And there are endless amounts of boyfriend trends occurring on TikTok. Golden retriever boyfriend, hot rodent boyfriend, and other boyfriend flaunting related trends on TikTok. And I have a whole video about it on my Patreon. You can check it out on patreon.com/MadisonBrown. If it's not up by the day this video is on YouTube, it will definitely be up there by tomorrow. It's just so crazy to like really think about that, because you'd think dating app, that's meant for dating, for meeting someone to date, to maybe fall in love with. But really, they're just hookup apps at this point. And people, especially women, are fed up with it. They're like, I'm not participating in this anymore. And for a while, that was okay, because we were sold this idea that, you know, if you're a sexually liberated woman, then you should be okay with hooking up. You should be okay with casual relationships. And I think a lot of us felt like, oh, well, I'm a cool girl. I'm a sexually liberated girl, so I should be okay with this. And eventually, you know, we realized, actually, this is like not in my best interest at all, and I'm not doing this anymore. Because when you really think about it, the patriarchy does benefit from us lying to ourselves and denying ourselves of what we truly want, giving our bodies away, even if we don't fully know if we want to, for the sake of feeling liberated and feeling like, oh, you know, I'm a feminist, and it's okay if I hook up, and it's okay if I don't want a relationship, which is true. But if you don't want to just hook up and you do want a relationship, you're allowed to want that, and you're allowed to be like, hey, actually, I'm not doing this. I'm not participating in this. Bumble did apologize for their ad campaign. A lot of people push back on it, and they're like, Bumble, what the hell is this? Like, this is not the serve you think it is. Women are going celibate for a good reason, and it's just so obvious that dating apps like don't really have people's best interest in mind, and they're just trying to make money, and they are so desperate to get us back on the apps to keep their business going. They will do and say anything, even if it's outrageous, to get our attention. They're literally telling us, hey, stop that celibacy thing. Whatever it is that you think you're doing that's, you know, positively impacting your mental health and helping you have a better relationship with your body. Enough of that. Download Bumble. But you know what? Kudos to all the ladies out there, or anyone out there who's celibate and has like made waves and has been a part of this change. I do think this wave of celibacy is important and means a lot, and there's a lot to discuss about this, which is what this video is for. Someone said, the fact that Bumble released all these ads that are low-key coming at women for our decision to either not be on the apps, not date, be celibate, but aren't addressing the behavior of men on these apps speaks volumes. And I think that's so true, because again, women drive the success of these apps.
Because I genuinely think that the women messages first idea is such a red herring. It's a nice guy's idea of what a woman would like. And I know that the CEO of Bumble is a woman. Like, I understand that Bumble was created by a woman. I'm just saying that internalized misogyny, it runs super, 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 super deep. And she relied on the fact that she was a woman in this app space, in this dating app space, to sell her idea as different, better, or special. But you have to think about the kind of person, not gender, the kind of person who would want to commodify dating. And she used women message first as a way to set her platform apart. But women are now starting to opt out of dating. Like, we're done. We're opting out. We're saying, you know what? Childless, single, unmarried women are actually one of the happiest demographics of people. And so what does Bumble do? Bumble can't use the women message first, so women come flock to our platform. And women are what make dating platforms successful, by the way. When we're talking about investment and trying to get funding and trying to get... Dude, Bumble has always been a nice guy magnet. It has always been about performative feminism, like performative actions around respecting women. Like, oh, I signed up for Bumble because women message first, and so that means I understand, is always the vibe that I got from the men that I would meet off Bumble. This is a certain type of environment for a certain type of man looking for a certain type of particularly ignorant woman who feels empowered, and can't be me. I just don't think that they anticipated the doubling down. Like, I don't think they anticipate how actually dedicated we are to either men evolving or us living in peace.
They're telling us like, oh, you should keep hooking up. You should keep going out and going on dates and dating men who don't really give a shit about you for our benefit. They're not saying, oh, hey men, maybe make the experience for women better, because that's not profitable and it's harder. It's not as easy as just like shaming or making fun of women for doing something for themselves, decentering men. And I mean, that was kind of the playbook for marketing for so long, and still is. Like, you target women's insecurities, or just completely create an insecurity that wasn't within our awareness before, and then market towards women to try to fix this insecurity. And women have really wised up, and they're like, hey, like, we're not drinking the Kool-Aid anymore. I think the reason why dating apps are no longer that successful is because they've tried to completely commodify and gamify the process of dating and matchmaking. And when you do that, that completely takes away like the authentic connection that is required when finding a lover. The algorithms have gotten so aggressive to the point where you can't even like find quality matches most of the time because the app is gatekeeping it behind a paywall. They're like, oh, you're lonely? Well, look at all these suitable bachelors, but you can't have access to them. But for $5.99 a month, you can. Love is just around the corner, and if you just pay a monthly fee, you can see the other side of that corner. Hinge especially does this thing where, like, you'll download the app, you get all these matches, all these likes, whatever, and then after like a few days, it completely dries up. You get maybe 1 like a day, and it's just like a constant cycle of like deleting, re-downloading, deleting, re-downloading, hoping it'll be different this time. I don't think this is what Hinge meant when they said this is the app that was built to be deleted. Like, this is like way worse than anything that we were anticipating. It's just so disheartening, and it's really sad, and it sucks. Also, allegedly, there's an attractiveness score.
There are numerous TikToks, especially more recently among Gen Z users, wherein users are lamenting their matches. One user said her matches look like they snuck onto Earth. Some others have said that it's decreased their self-confidence because they're getting matches with people who they wouldn't necessarily meet with or talk to in real life. What's your response to that, especially since this app is one you say is so deeply focused on compatibility?
Yeah, and we're getting better all the time, and we're certainly not perfect. Matchmaking is very hard. Dating is very hard. We're not like a tech product that you can click the button and it plays the song. It's not just a technical problem. It's a very deep and human problem, and it's one of the most intractable problems that people have been writing songs about. So it's definitely a hard problem. We do see in terms of effectiveness and efficiency overall in the app, like we are getting people out on great dates. And that's why I think you're seeing that people generally today, they meet online more than anywhere else.
Another topic I hear often, especially among the TikTok set, we'll call them, is that Hinge has an attractiveness score. Is that true?
We don't really have an attractiveness score. For every single person, we have a sort of individualized taste profile of who you like and who likes you back.
And what makes up that taste profile?
We look at who you've liked and who's liked you and who you've passed on and who's passed on you. And that just gives us a sense generally using machine learning to understand like generally how likely are you to like someone and how much is someone likely to like you back.
Hinge literally has a featured page. It's so weird. It's like Hinge's like prize blue ribbon cattle. Like, here, see how many hotties are on this app? Join us. You can message them, but only one. They have this weird rose thing where you can like send a rose to one of these prize cattle people. Again, meant to incentivize you to buy more roses so you can message all the high quality people on Hinge. The collapse of dating apps' usability can be blamed on the paid subscription model and the near monopoly these apps have over the dating world. While dozens of sites exist, most 20-something daters use the big three: Tinder, Hinge, and Bumble. All 3 sites have a premium version users must pay for. According to a study conducted by Morgan Stanley, around a quarter of people on the dating apps use these services, averaging out at under $20 a month. The purpose, many believe, is to keep them as paid users for as long as possible. Even if we hate it, even if it's a cycle of diminishing returns, there is no real alternative. Many apps have pulled the people you'd most like to match with into a separate category, such as Hinge's Standouts section, often only accessible to those who pay for premium features. And even if you do decide to sign up for them, many people find the idea of someone paying to match with them to be off-putting anyway. If I don't pay, I don't date, a friend in his studies told me. He spends around $50 a month on premium dating app subscriptions and digital roses to grab the attention of potential matches. He's gone on 65 dates over the last year, he said. None have stuck, so he keeps paying. Yet Shares, Bumble stock's price has fallen from about $75 to about $11 in its IPO, and user growth have fallen, so the apps have more aggressively rolled out new premium models. In September 2023, Tinder released a $500 per month plan, but the economics of dating apps may not add up. But going back to what I was saying about hookup culture, I think dating apps, again, have just made hookup culture so extreme to the point where it's like, it feels like nobody wants a relationship, they just want to have these short casual hookups or situationships. And I think there are a lot of things that led up to this kind of peak when it comes to hookup culture. It's not just the dating apps. It's a long history of sexual revolutions, ebbs and flows between conservatism and openness with sexuality. And this may be no surprise, history repeats itself. So I want to talk about a few sexual revolutions that have happened throughout history, because yes, there is more than just the one in the 60s, and also like the Tumblr sexual positivity era, because I think that really had something to do with the culture that we're living in now, because I think the Tumblr era sexual positivity really did a number on us and led us to a dark place. It seemed cool at first, and now we're like, oh wait, why was I doing that on the internet? Or why was I letting the internet influence me in such a way that was like actually quite detrimental to my mental health? Anyway, let's get into some sexual revolution, shall we? So when you Google the sexual revolution, or if you look at the Wikipedia definition, it says sexual liberation was a social movement that challenged challenged traditional codes of behavior related to sexuality and interpersonal relationships throughout the developed Western world from the 1960s to the 1970s. But some would argue that the first sexual revolution happened way before that. Specifically, Farah Deboiwala, I probably butchered that, I'm sorry. He argues that the first sexual revolution happened way before the 60s in his book, The Origins of Sex, A History of the First Sexual Revolution. In this book, he discusses the origins of sexuality in modern Western culture and how it really emerged in the 1800s, when society started to inhabit cities and the church could no longer regulate people's sexuality. For millennia, sex had been strictly regulated by the church, the state, and society, who vigorously and brutally attempted to punish any sex outside of marriage, but by 1800, everything had changed. Deboiwala shows how the dramatic change came about, tracing the interplay of intellectual trends, religious and cultural shifts, and politics and demographics. The Enlightenment led to the presumption that sex was a private matter, that morality could not be imposed, that men, not women, were the more lustful gender. Moreover, the rise of cities eroded community-based moral policing, and religious divisions undermined both church authority and fear of divine punishment. Sex became a central topic in poetry, drama, and fiction. Diarists such as Samuel Pepys obsessed over it. In the 1700s, it became possible for a Church of Scotland leader to commend complete sexual liberty for both men and women, arguing that the sexual revolution that really counted occurred long before the cultural movement of the 1960s. Anyways, moving into the 20th century, there was even a sexual revolution that happened in the 20s. The term sexual revolution was used far before the 60s. One of its earliest uses of the terms appeared in a book written in 1929 called Is Sex Necessary? Or Why You Feel the Way You Do by James Thurber and E.B. White. They have a chapter that's called The Sexual Revolution, being a rather complete survey on the entire sexual scene. Similar to the 1800s, the rise and expansion of cities really impacted the normalization of premarital sex because, again, it's a lot harder to control a population of people when they're so close together and there's so many of them. Accompanying the focus on glamour and leisure in the 1910s and 1920s was a growing public expression of sexuality. While an underworld of prostitution was already in existence, a popular and sexualized urban environment emerged during this period. Part of what made the environment sexual was the mingling of men and women, especially young men and women, with minimal supervision and where people consumed alcohol. So, another factor aside from cities that influenced the rise of sexual activity amongst young people were cars. The growing popularity of the automobile also facilitated increased sexual activity among young people because of the privacy it provided. Motion pictures and theater capitalized on the public's growing acceptance of heterosexuality. If I've learned anything from my teen culture and third spaces video is that cars were one of the main reasons why people were back in the day. It's like one of the last things I would have thought about, but it seems so obvious, especially when I think back to when I was a teenager and the things I got up to once I got my license and access to a motor vehicle. Like, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, not only does it grant you a faster and more convenient way of getting from point A to point B, but it also grants you independence, freedom, and privacy. There are so many like golden age era Hollywood movies that have a scene where two people, like a man and a woman, are in a car together and getting very hot and heavy. Like, that is like something I feel like I've noticed in a lot of old movies, and it makes sense. I mean, you have this new, essentially, mobile home. Not really, but like, you have this new thing that allows you, like, 4 walls, privacy, and you can go anywhere. Of course, teenagers and young people are going to take advantage of that. Another factor that really led the sexual revolution of the 20s and the 60s, spoiler alert, is war. Something about war just makes people really horny, I guess. No, but I think what happens is war kind of brings people to this new awareness about the world and society and, you know, their lives that they're living and how it's influenced by the government. Also, you know, I think war just like brings out like human nature in people that's like really raw and like real. But the reason why World War I impacted this sexual revolution is because venereal diseases were rampant during this time among American soldiers. An estimated 96% of cases of venereal disease were contracted prior to soldiers' entrance into the service, illustrating the prevalence of sexual activity. As men with sexually transmitted diseases such as syphilis and gonorrhea began filling infirmaries and seriously affecting the military's available manpower, the reality became impossible to ignore. So the government was like, okay, I guess we have to teach these people about sex because they're dying too much for us to use them as pawns in war. Fine, we'll teach you about STDs, only because we can't use your bodies to die in other ways. Unfortunately, this is, I guess, what had to happen for Americans to get access to sexual education. Sexual education for soldiers became a necessity of war for many nations, and just one of the many dirty secrets of military service, not to be discussed in polite company. Anyway, aside from war, fashion was also a major factor in the sexual revolution. Big shout out to my flapper girls out there. They were the OG Fashion Nova baddies of the 20s. I'm just kidding. But flappers were a pillar in the sexual liberation of women in the 20s. Not only did these women embrace their sexuality, they often publicly displayed it. An explosion in the use of cosmetics and dramatic changes in fashion gave external expression to their acceptance of their sexuality, and a whole new breed of women, the flapper, was born. Obviously, in 2024, looking back on flappers, you think, that's their club outfit? That's slutty? Showing a little ankle was quite controversial back then. Even makeup was a sign of like pride. God forbid you put on a red lip. People are literally going to think that you are for the streets, that you're for sale. Sometimes I think about the outfits I wear. I'm like, ugh, if I was walking around in like the streets of New York in the 1920s, I would literally be stoned to death. I mean, if women's liberation is good for one thing, it's for being able to wear a crop top and some shorts in peace in 80-degree weather. Can I get an amen? No, but really, I mean, it's so crazy to think about. Like, a flapper dress to today's standard is quite conservative. But, you know, like I said, showing a bit of ankle, showing a little bit of shoulder was poor behavior. This may seem kind of a random little rant, but as I'm thinking about fashion, sexual liberation, and the way society ebbs and flows out of like really open sexuality to like more conservative opinions or practices, again, with the Tumblr era of sex positivity and like neoliberal feminism, we were right in saying that, you know, we should be allowed to like wear clothes without being like slut shamed for it. You know, if you're like an 8th grade girl wearing shorts a little bit above the fingertips, you shouldn't be like sent home because of that, just because you might be distracting the boys. But I do think something that we need to be reminded of, and we've kind of lost the plot along the way, is like there are times and places for certain outfits. There are times and places for your shortest, tightest, skimpiest little fit. It's not that you're a slut or that you're wrong for wearing that outfit, but you might be wrong for wearing it in the wrong place. Like, you can't go to the office wearing a crop top. I'm really sorry. I know there's this one girl who was like, here's my like office outfit of the day, and everyone's like, what office are you going to? And I feel like Gen Z like doesn't know how to dress like properly for certain occasions, because I feel like it's a very Gen Z thing to like go to your first job and wear something that's like kind of inappropriate, and then your supervisor's like, hey, like, you can't wear that, and you're like, I'm sorry, are you slut shaming me? And it's like, well, okay, like, not really, like, you know what I mean? Like, you're not being slut shamed, you're just not wearing something that's appropriate for work. Anyway, let's get back to business. Benjamin Barr Lindsay explained, excess of all sorts are usually a rebound from an excess of forced conformity. Women in the 20s were emerging from an era of corsets and ankle-length bathing suits, and many pushed back against the society which could have them arrested for showing too much skin, enforced by vice police-bearing rulers. And I feel like that perfectly explains what I just said. We're being told, oh, you're just too slutty, or you can't wear that because you're distracting boys. And then we go to this extreme of like, I should be able to wear whatever I want, anywhere that I want. And if you tell me otherwise, you're like oppressing me. And it's like, well, that's not really what's happening. Obviously, this is a completely different scenario because, listen, if I was forced to wear an ankle-length bathing suit, yeah, I'd be revolting too. I'd be pushing back too. Like, are you serious? I'd be probably running through the streets naked as a protest. Just kidding. It's a terrible idea. Never do that. But again, that also corroborates my argument that American history, or history in general, goes through these ebbs and flows of like being oppressed, being liberated, getting to a point of almost like hypersexuality and then going back to a more conservative culture. Now, what is a sexual revolution without the increased acceptance or accessibility of contraceptive? The increasing acceptance of contraceptive use likely began before the 20s, but open discussion and the campaign led by Margaret Sanger to remove legal barriers and provide education began shrinking family size and almost certainly lowered the rate of illegitimate births and unmarried relationships. By the way, you're probably like, who is Margaret Sanger? She's quite important. She was a birth control advocate during this time in the 20s, and she fought against the Cornstalk Law of 1873, which prohibited the distribution of information about sex, including birth control devices and other articles of immoral use. Birth control, these women thought, provided the key to women's liberation because it separated demands of reproduction from sexuality, which so true. I think the 20s sexual revolution emphasizes how important education is and how influential it can be on a society, because that was really what was being more normalized and accepted, was just the education and knowledge around it, not even the use of it. It's not like unmarried women were allowed to take birth control at this point. And it really proves how the government can control its citizens by gatekeeping knowledge and education, because an uneducated society is an easily controllable society. And with researching these different phases of sexual revolution and the Western world and America specifically, it just reminds me of why they want to take abortion away from us so badly. It's because less birth control, less abortions means more births, which means more soldiers for war. Hello? Like, the reason they gave soldiers sexual education is because they needed more bodies, because so many people were fucking dying, and the government can't have that. So it's impossible for historians to really determine if contraceptive increased, like, actual sexual activity, but it is safe to say that based off of what was happening culturally and, like, the sexually charged atmosphere was probably leading to an increase of sexual behavior. Petting parties were like a really big thing back in the day. If you've never heard of a petting party, it's essentially a place where young people go to get frisky, but not too frisky. Some people think there were like orgies going on at these petting parties. They weren't. It was like a very PG-13 sex party where they would just go and like hang out, make out, maybe do a little fondling, heavy petting, if you will. And that was like a way for young people to like explore their sexuality and to have, you know, more sexual experiences before marriage. But no one was actually like having like sex for real, because I think that was a little too much for people in the 20s. But in a way, I think that kind of like regulation allowed them to explore more comfortably. I think maybe less people would be participating if they knew like, oh, like people have sex here. So I think having those like clear boundaries made it more accessible to people while still encouraging this like experimentation and exploration. So after a period of what seemed to be hypersexual and obsessive culture around sex, which was a natural response from a repressed society, the pendulum swung back to a more conservative culture. As we leave the 1920s, a new embrace of some traditional values did occur. Hemlines went back down, and the above-the-knee skirt of the flappers ceded to the floor-length gown of the 30s. Some couples found the aftermath of sexual experimentation and open relationships more difficult to bear than they had anticipated and returned to the more conservative marital roles they had been raised under, which to me sounds familiar with the rise of polyamory, open relationships, ethical non-monogamy. I wouldn't be shocked if in a few years a lot of those couples were like, you know what, this caused too many problems than we anticipated, let's just go back to being monogamous. And I mean, even now, like, I feel like the conversation around monogamy versus polyamory has become a little more nuanced. For a while, it felt like polyamory was seen as like the more evolved relationship. Like, oh, I don't want to own my partner. I just want to be free, and I want my partner to be free, and we should be allowed to explore outside of our relationship sexually because we're just so evolved. We're so different. And if you're monogamous, you're selfish and controlling. And now I think people are understanding like, well, no, like some people can be monogamous and that's fine. Just like people can be polyamorous and that works for them. And I hate that there's like this one is better than the other kind of mentality with polyamory or monogamy. And sometimes I wonder if like polyamorous people feel like, you know, they need to prove their relationship so much that they feel it's necessary to look down on people who don't practice the same kind of relationship, you know, to kind of like validate themselves or make themselves feel better. It's like when you're vegan and someone who eats meat is like, oh, like, are you offended that I eat meat? And the vegan's like, I don't give a fuck. But even then, it's like there are vegans out there who will judge you for not being vegan. So it's like, why? Who cares? Who gives a fuck? Just do what you want to do. Anyways, let's finally get into the 1960s, the star of the sexual revolution show. So according to my research, the sexual revolution started as a result of three major cultural forces: youth culture and the thirst for sexual experiences before marriage, the emergence of feminism and the women's movement at the end of the 60s, and lastly, gay liberation, especially from Stonewall in 1969. So the sexual revolution involved mainly the rise and normalization of premarital sex. Men and women were engaging in sexual activity at younger ages. Sexual activity was known to not actually increase that rapidly at this time, but public interest in sex was a lot more widespread with the influence of media entertainment. Things like erotic novels and movies really influenced people to discuss sex more openly and have a larger curiosity and thirst, no pun intended, for knowledge around sex. Similar to how I said like war and cities really influenced the rise of sexual revolutions in American society, media and entertainment were a huge factor in people's growing curiosity around sex, which I feel like seems obvious. I mean, media and entertainment are so influential on society, which is why the government tried to ban certain books, movies throughout time, especially in like the 60s. Like, purity culture is so strong in the US, it's actually insane. Like, so many countries, especially in Europe, were so ahead of their time. And I mean, people were literally like smuggling in books into the US because we were so deprived of like sexually charged literature. Shout out to my man's D.H. Lawrence. May he rest in peace. You would have loved A Court of Thorn and Roses. I'm just kidding. No, he wouldn't. I've never read it, but it's not, I don't know. In the United States, in the years 1959 through 1966, bans on 3 books with explicit erotic content were challenged and overturned. In 1967, the U.S. Congress set up a Commission of Pornography and Obscenity to define pornography and obscenity, provide guidelines for its regulations, and to assess its significance in American society. The report of the commission concluded that its research had found no evidence that exposure to explicit sexual materials led to any criminal or delinquent behavior among youth and adults. Isn't that crazy to think that, like, you know, the government thought, oh my God, these kids are gonna read these erotic novels and turn into criminals. I'd be like if the US government banned 50 Shades of Grey because they thought like the middle-aged women who were reading it were going to turn into like bank robbing prostitutes just from reading that book. Media is influential, but it's not that influential to the point where it takes someone out of their character and values to the point where they're literally committing crimes and becoming degenerates. Like, that's crazy. Not, you know, obviously that being a sex worker is like morally wrong, but according to the US government, it definitely is. Similar to, I think, the 20s, the 60s sexual revolution was really more so a cultural revolution than just a revolution in sexual activity. It seems like sexual revolutions are more so a shift in how people view sex, talk about sex, the availability around sexual media and education rather than like actual increasing numbers in premarital sex. And again, it's really hard to kind of define that and get like hard data on people's like sexual activity. Now we're getting to the birth control section. In 1960, the most popular form of birth control, the oral contraceptive pill, became commercially available. However, it wasn't until 1967 where non-married women had access to this contraceptive pill. Also in the same year, 1967, abortion and homosexuality were partially decriminalized. The two greatest sins, abortion and homosexuality. And it was only partially decriminalized, so I don't really know what that entirely means, but I guess you couldn't go to jail for being gay and having an abortion. The invention of penicillin in the 50s decreased the mortality of syphilis, leading to an increase in non-marital sex as well. Improvement of technology and obstetrics also led to an increase in women's life expectancy. thus leading to an increase in non-marital sex as well and women's sexual freedom. So, as we get through the decades, we see the risk of sex just being chipped away with the improvements of medicine and technology, birth control, and treatments for STDs really took away this idea that sex was only meant for procreation, and there are a lot of, risks involved with having sex or getting pregnant, and with those risks being taken away, that allowed people to have sex more. Now let's get into a little bit of feminism, shall we? Because I really think feminism was like the face of sexual liberation in the 60s. The sexual liberation movement was aided by feminist ideologies and their mutual struggle to challenge traditional ideas regarding female sexuality, male sexuality, and queer sexuality. So some of the main goals for feminists during this time were to eliminate unjust favorable bias towards men, eliminating the objectification of women, and supporting women's right to choose their partners, specifically sexual partners. The feminist movements insisted and focused on the sexual liberation for women, both physical and psychological. The pursuit of sexual pleasure for women was the core ideology, which subsequently was to set the foundations for female independence. Sexual liberation and female liberation, the feminist movement, are so deeply intertwined because you can't have female liberation without sexual liberation, because obviously, society, the government, men, the patriarchy has tried so hard to suppress and control women's sexuality, because in many ways that is one of our most powerful assets. Our sexuality is the reason why the world goes round, why the human race continues to exist. And that's a lot of power to hold. And men, the patriarchy, know that, so they try to control it. And so to be a liberated woman, it's important to, understand your sexuality, to explore it, and to have freedom around it. Sexual liberation was one of the main avenues in which women pursued liberation. Many feminist thinkers believed that assertion of the primacy of sexuality would be a major step towards the ultimate goal of women's liberation. Thus, women were urged to initiate sexual advances, enjoy sex, and experiment with new forms of sexuality. So with that last quote I gave, that reminds me of Sex and the City, actually, which leads me to the next section of this video. Sex and the City, I think, symbolizes a mini sexual revolution for women in the late 20th into the early 21st century, because it was really groundbreaking in the way that it represented female sexuality in mainstream media, because we hadn't really seen that before. It was a symbol of the new millennium and a symbol of this new era of femininity and female sexual liberation that really marked a turning point. We saw women in the workplace, powerful women who had these amazing careers, and they were single and they were having sex and talking about it. Although I think Sex and the City represents white feminism, it still had its iconic moments and allowed women to express themselves so freely that was deemed as taboo or inappropriate before. Something that I find interesting about Sex and the City is the way that it has lived on, and it has been the center of so much discourse amongst not only millennials, but Gen Z as well. It both is such a sign of the times, but also timeless in the sense that we can look back on the show and we can give our critiques on it in ways that the show fell short in terms of representation, white feminism, like I said, choice feminism, but it also gives us this source material when discussing topics around sexuality, boundaries, pick-me-ism, things like that. Something that I think is really interesting is the way that we view the Samantha versus Charlotte complex. You could also put that into the Madonna whore complex, Samantha being the whore and Charlotte being the Madonna. For a show of its time, Samantha was such a groundbreaking character because, she was sexually open, fluid, bisexual, or at least for a few episodes. The way that show deals with bisexuality is a little it's not great, but still, at the time it was very, very groundbreaking. Everyone wanted to be Samantha. Everyone wanted to be cool. They wanted to be liberated. But now we question, what does being liberated really mean? Because although Samantha, she f***ed like a man, does that really mean liberation for women? Why is it that we have to act like men to be liberated, to be cool, to be free? You can be a woman and exhibit these traditional female traits and still be liberated and not be considered a pick-me. And some even say Samantha was the real pick-me over Charlotte, because Samantha, although she tried to act like she, only was interested in casual sex and would have sex like a man, she still ended up getting hurt with that kind of philosophy. Her relationship with Richard is a clear example of that. He cheated on her. She was upset by it, but she took him back and forgave him and tried to act like, cheating wasn't a big deal, or that, it's something she could move past. Of course, he ends up betraying her again. The relationship doesn't work out. And we see Samantha abandon herself and resist her instincts and her desires of monogamy and commitment to keep a man.
There's a big difference between being a pick-me and wanting a man in your life while still having standards. Because Samantha was, sexually liberated and more out there, more what we think of as modern, people think that she's liberated and they think Charlotte's a pick-me because she wanted to get married. I don't think that at all. Though she wanted to get married, Charlotte was not a pick-me. She never compromised on her standards of what a man should have to get with her. And even if a man had all the things she wanted, the best pedigree and all the money in the world, she never tolerated disrespect. You know who was a pick-me? Samantha. Homegirl said from season 1, she forgave cheating. And when Richard cheated, she forgave him, as she said she would. She wised up, but it was a pattern with her. Before she and Richard were monogamous, she agreed to let him keep seeing other women because she was afraid he would leave her if she said no. She agreed to a threesome she didn't want because she was afraid to lose Richard. She always allowed him to dictate the terms of the relationship. And when he finally agreed to become monogamous, he cheated on her after like 2 seconds and she still took him back. And she even tried to take Dominic back after he treated her like crap and left her for another woman. Then he dumped her ass again. But it wasn't her forgiveness of cheating that made her a pick-me. It was the fact she didn't esteem herself. When Richard was first trying to turn the F-buddy relationship into a romance, Samantha kept sexualizing it because she didn't feel she had anything of value to offer. She didn't think a man could love her for her. When she lost her sex drive because of chemo, she told Smith he could sleep with other women. He said, I don't want to do that. And before that, he hadn't even mentioned mixing sex. But once again, Samantha thought the physical was all she had to offer, even after all they had been through. She felt she had to overcompensate to keep his attention. For all her freewheeling, supposedly love him and leave him lifestyle, she sure did a lot to keep a man.
I think Charlotte is having a resurgence within Gen Z because she demonstrates boundaries and self-respect. In the show, she's considered a prude, but having boundaries doesn't make you a prude. Knowing your worth and sticking by that is admirable, and I think this generation understands that really well. Obviously, every Sex and the City character has their flaws, but there's also something that we can learn from all of them. We can learn from Samantha and we can learn from Charlotte, as well as Miranda and Carrie, even if it means learning from their character flaws. I read an article all about celibacy and Gen Z's embrace of opting out of dating and whatnot, and I thought that their mention of Sex and the City was very spot on. In the show, Samantha says, "This is the first time in the history of Manhattan that women have had as much money and power as men, plus the equal luxury of treating men like sex objects." In an article that I read all about celibacy and how Gen Z relates to sex and sex positivity, they gave this quote and followed up with this. Samantha explains to the girls over dinner, "Sexism and inequality were simply things of the past, and women could now walk, talk, and most importantly, fuck like the patriarchs. It was their choice, and these choices were empowering." The 2010s ushered in a similar type of casual sex discourse through Tumblr's sexual positivity. And before I get into the Tumblr sex positivity, I just want to say how interesting that quote is, because like I said, why is it that as women we have to adhere to the behaviors and mentalities of men to be liberated? Why is it that being a man is the peak of human existence? Why is it that being a man is aspirational when we are not men? We are women, and there's nothing weak about being a woman, because this quote implies that, women want love in relationships and they're closed off to casual sex. Why is that bad? What is true is that as a woman, you should be able to have casual sex and not feel shame about it, and you should have that right to explore your sexuality openly and freely. But I don't know if the answer to equality for all is treating everybody as sexual objects. Thoughts, questions, concerns? I don't find it liberating to consider myself sexual objects, and I don't find it liberating to view men as sexual objects. I feel like we've lost the plot where, we were trying to get society to understand that we are all human beings with feelings and real human experiences, and we're not objects. Because feminism was all about eliminating the objectification of women, and we kind of evolved into the space of like objectifying everybody. And it's not to say that, being sexualized is inherently demoralizing and inherently bad. Sometimes you do want to be sexualized and you want to be a sexual object or a sexual human, but to kind of cut people down to a sexual object over the guise of liberation and equality just seems a bit misguided and wrong. Men are socialized to believe that the more sex they have, the more of a man they become. And a lot of men fall victim to that and they feel like, okay, well, I guess society is telling me that I have to have as much sex as possible to validate my masculinity. And a lot of men find themselves feeling insecure because of that and do terrible things or feel terribly about themselves. And through my experience as a woman dating men, I've realized that, not all men just want sex all the time. And men go through their own interpersonal turmoil when they believe that to be true and try to follow suit in that kind of societal belief. So I think it's safe to say that Tumblr really did a number on all of us. I was heavy on Tumblr during its peak, and I see how I made some mistakes in my past as a minor and as a young woman with the influence of Tumblr and its sex positivity. Now, of course, sex positivity is a great thing, and I don't think being celibate means you're anti-sex or you're sex negative. But unfortunately, because, again, we went through that kind of societal ebb and flow of getting into a sex positive place, into a hypersexual space, we kind of lost the plot and thought that the only way to liberate ourselves sexually as women is to sexualize ourselves extremely. Around this time, young women, many of whom were underage, were led to believe that they could outsmart the patriarchy by sexualizing themselves. I can't stress enough how the sex positivity movement on Tumblr intensified my hypersexuality in my teens and allowed me to use my countless men in the name of being free. I feel like that is still the patriarchy at work, unfortunately, undermining sex positivity and female liberation, because they convinced us that us being more, promiscuous was liberating, and unfortunately, men still benefit from that. I mean, there are so many men out there who are probably like, why aren't you sleeping with me on the first date? I thought you were a liberated feminist. There's no shame in sleeping with me on the first date, because you're liberated sexually. And it's like, unfortunately, men still benefit from that. And that's not to say if you want to have casual sex as a woman that you're inherently, directly feeding the patriarchy. But we were sold this idea that if we expose ourselves online, both as adults and as underage girls, that we are sex positive, that we are body positive, that we are liberated because look at me, look at my body online. I'm underage, but I'm in control of my sexuality. And if you see my video, you're not sexually liberated, you're 16, you know all about that and you understand my thoughts on that. And it's like, yes, we should be able to express ourselves and explore our sexuality, but I don't think the internet is a place to do it, especially if you're underage. There was even a quote that I pulled from my research about the 20th century sexual liberations that I think explains what I'm thinking right now. Nevertheless, among many feminists, the view soon became widely held that, thus far, the sexual freedoms gained in the sexual revolution of the 60s, such as the decreasing emphasis on monogamy, have been largely gained by men at women's expense. And I think it's true, and what I'm thinking isn't an original thought. This has been going on for years. Look at, like I said earlier with polyamory, there are so many men out there who are like, oh, I thought you were a feminist. I thought you were liberated. I thought you were open-minded. You don't want to be in a polyamorous relationship? You want to own me? We should be polyamorous. Monogamy is for closed-minded conservatives. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Women are still being taken advantage of under the guise of sexual liberation. And that's not to say all sexual liberation is bad, because I know there will be comments saying oh, so you think women shouldn't be sexually liberated? That's obviously not what I'm saying. I just think sometimes we fly a little too close to the sun, we lose the plot, and we're almost reverting back to what the patriarchy wants from us. One Twitter user wrote that the sex positivity movement led her to be manipulated and emotionally abused for sex. She continued, I would have never slept slut-shamed anyone or tell people that casual sex is bad. I'm just saying that these teens see these conversations too and think that it's empowering to have sex without it meaning anything, which puts them at a risk of being taken advantage of, like I was. And yeah, I relate to that, and it's so true. I think real sexual liberation is allowing women and all human beings to view sex as something intimate, and you can have intimacy with strangers, you can have casual sex and allow it to be intimate, but you're allowed to have sex on your own terms. Isn't that what we've all been fighting for? You're allowed to have sex the way you want to, and there's no right or wrong way. If you want to wait until you're in a relationship, or if you want to explore and have sex with as many people as you want to, it's up to you. But you shouldn't feel pressured to think that one way is better than the other based off of what the internet is telling you. 22-year-old Charlie, writer of the Substack Evil Female, told Dazed that they too fell prey to the Tumblr rhetoric, that having lots of casual, emotionless sex was some sort of political and aesthetic statement, a testament to feminism, to being cool and detached and cosmopolitan. As they became increasingly detached from their partners, Charlie decided to reevaluate their relationship with themselves, their body, and the people around them. As a result, they chose to abstain from sex for a year and a half. Man, Charlie, I relate to you. To give a personal anecdote, when I met my partner on Hinge, I was in a place of like, I'm not into the whole casual sex thing. I love having sex, but I want it to be with someone who I trust, because I'd experienced so many sexual encounters that led me to feel shitty about myself and made me feel worthless and feel like I was taken advantage of, or made me at least feel like I was used. And it doesn't feel good to feel used. Even if you were the one who chose to experience it, it was completely consensual. Afterwards, it does feel a bit odd and like, man, I was just a body. And it's not empowering for me to look at the other person and be like, he was just a body. It just doesn't feel good. And honestly, something that I learned from my experience of like disengaging completely from casual sex is it makes it a lot easier to find love, at least in my experience, because when you're like not willing to hook up with people, you quickly weed out those who only want to use your body. And you quickly weed out the men who will try to act like, they're interested in you romantically, but only just want to hook up with you in the end and only see you as a sexual object. It took me realizing, I do want love. I do want a relationship. Maybe not now. It's not a necessity. But at the end of the day, I know that a relationship is something that I value. And I'm not going to find it if I keep rejecting my own deep wants and desires, because it felt uncool to want love. It felt uncool to want a boyfriend. And that's not uncool. That's just very human. And that's okay. And so it seems like a lot of people feel this way. And there's new Google data revealed that the term celibacy had a 90% increase in searches in the UK. On TikTok, the hashtag celibacy currently has 167.7 million views, with hundreds of young people making videos about their celibacy journey. And I think it's important to define what celibacy is. There's like abstinence and celibacy, and with celibacy there are ties to religion. Celibacy is known for its roots in traditional Christian teachings. It's a voluntary vow of sexual abstinence for religious reasons. Though most people online use the term celibacy, they mean abstinence, as they aren't abstaining from sex for religious reasons. So I think the main reason why people are going celibate is for their own mental health and reassessing their relationship with their body and their relationship with sex. Some people are like, hey, I don't want to have sex until abortion rights are reinforced in the United States, because it's really scary to have casual sex out here if I can't terminate the pregnancy if I fall pregnant. Some people are going celibate because they're disillusioned by hookup culture of today, which I think is connected to mental health. In one of the many articles that I read about celibacy, one person shared that, long story short, I'm considering celibacy because I want to stop viewing sex as some sort of validation, to learn how to stop being jealous when people around me get more non-platonic attention than me, to find worth in myself even if others, read romantic sexual partners, don't. 21-year-old Anna had a period of hypersexual activity while she was a teenager, and as a result wants to take a break from sex. I had been hypersexual for a long time and self-admittedly pursued a h0e phase, or a period of high-risk sex practices to soothe. Through lots of therapy and seeking out information independently, I started to learn that the sex was no longer a healthy or sustainable coping mechanism for me. I want to unlearn healthy attachments to sex and the ideas around it. And I think that sentiment really connects to this idea of decentering men and going boy sober because, we were taught that being promiscuous meant liberation, but it quickly turned into this really unhealthy, codependent relationship with sex where we were seeking out sex to validate ourselves. And decentering men is all about not relying on men to validate yourself as a woman. Perhaps it's one way women are searching for peace within themselves after one too many situations, ghostings, and other romantic hardships. And I think that quote again reconnects back to the dating apps and how the ghosting, the situationships, and all that stuff is so normalized, and it's so normalized to have these horror stories when it comes to dating because it's so easy to ghost people these days with dating apps. It's so easy to expect low effort relationships by people who don't actually want to love you. They just want to use you. There's been so many celebrities as well who have been talking about celibacy. Julia Fox talks about this, and I feel like what she's had to say about celibacy really connects to the idea that we don't need to validate ourselves through sex and through men.
Well, I just think nothing good comes from having sex, including children. No, I'm just kidding. But, I think with the overturning of Roe v. Wade and, our rights being stripped away from us, this is a way that I can take back the control. And it just sucks that it has to be in that way. But I just don't feel comfortable until things change.
Why would I lay down with someone who won't stand up for me? Mm-hmm. And these men, they're not mad. They don't care that women's rights are being stripped away because it doesn't really affect them. They don't give a shit. Obviously, I'm not saying all men support the ban on abortion, but most men aren't really saying anything about it. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like that, So this is my subtle rebellion in my own way.
She talks about how having a child has really freed her from that and that she doesn't need to adhere to the male gaze for validation because she already has a kid and she's like, I don't care. I don't want to do this. And she has talked about celibacy and how she's like, I don't really need that. I'm good. I really commend everyone out there who is like returning to themselves and committing themselves to them and committing themselves to celibacy because they've realized that the relationship to sex is a bit unhealthy and they just need to have some time for themselves and not center their life and their worth and validation around men or around dating. And I think it's a great form of protest too. We're not going to engage with men who are shitty, who want to use us. We're just gonna opt out completely. And if men want to get their acts together, sure, that's great. But this is for us, and this is about validating ourselves and respecting our own wishes. Because we can't change men. We can't change anybody. We can only worry about ourselves and do what makes us happy. And I think that's what this kind of celibacy movement is all about. Let me know your thoughts on celibacy and what your journey is through this sexual revolution. Were you on Tumblr? Did you also fall victim to I don't want to say sex positivity, because obviously sex positivity is a good thing, but again, lots of plot, flew a little too close to the sun. Are you F that, I'm just gonna be in these streets and I don't care? Are you yeah, actually I think I will keep to myself a little bit? Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching. Join my Patreon for exclusive content, and I'll see you in the next video.